Gaming throughout the last decades is rapidly evolving in rendering, simulating, complex in mechanics, and content growth, but not in the presentation layer, the aspect what lacks the most valuable attention. Stories not becoming magnificent on their own. You can create and develop the most ambitious and creative plot in the entire genre and its history, but how the story will be told, and from what perspective, will determine its glory or shame. Call of Duty was one of the most unexpected sources of bringing a new form of storytelling. To be fair, the series is not the place where you need to look for new experience in FPS, but without any competitors, it's not that hard to do so. First-person shooters with any dignified single-player experience are almost vanished, rarely appearing in not that big amount of brutal, average, and questionable forms. And by experience, I mean not only gameplay itself. The process of point and clicking is pretty similar from title to title, slightly adjusting individual variables, but the context of the actions is truly making us immersed. What was driven to do them, and what involved action figures was there. Infinite Warfare was one of the most exciting games I have played in years, not only because of scale, diversity, gunplay, characters or storytelling, but all of them combined, at least partially. Infinite Warfare starts from a pretty standard point. You get the basic knowledge about the world, potential threat and covered task to accomplish. Simple, but necessary introduction part of the game, required to show new toys, adapt to controls and introduce villains. But when the mission overs, after seamless transition to the briefing room, I have noticed that something has changed. You get transported to the perspective of the main character and never left it since. Being the game with only one main and playable character, in the opening hours, the game utilizes this circumstance like no other shooter I know. You leave the protagonist's eyes only at the moments when it needs to show scenes with necessary staging and direction, fluidly transporting player from one section to another, without any time skips, offering continuous adventure rather than roller coaster ride, with several and separated breathtaking loops. The scale of immersion is tremendously huge. But after dealing with necessary tasks, destroying robots, boarding and blowing up starships, you gain access to the star system map and mission selection screen. And this is the point where the problems start. Smooth transitions through loading screens in continuous narration are probably far from a unique feature, but a noticeable change in the structure of the story being told, especially in contrast to the second act of the game and for the series as a whole. Inclusion of the mission's order choice naturally generates an avalanche-like number of execution order combinations, which when tasks are divided into main and additional, does not contribute to maintaining the sequence of events compared to the beginning of the game. You still do not leave the Nick-Reyes gaze, but the chain of events is no longer bound by a cross-cutting and seamless narrative. At any stage of the second act, all Jackal and additional missions can be performed in random order. Like everything what happens in this period of free narrative, they are just scattered sabotage actions using the methods of guerrilla warfare against the enemy with numerical superiority. They certainly demonstrate gameplay and staging variety, but they are insignificant in themselves, both for the storytelling sequence and for its semantic load. Between the first act and the final sequence, there are only 2 missions concentrated on the same narrative pace and plot development as it was presented at an earlier stage of the game, and even these missions are not able to demonstrate and reinforce the deliberately hostile and cruel motivation of the Martians and Salem Koch in particular. However, this is not Keith Harrington's fault. Compared to the full and ubiquitous Kevin Spacey participation in Advanced Warfare, everything what Admiral Koch does throughout the game, defiantly shoots one of his soldiers, sends several video messages, and dies. The almost complete antagonist absence could not be corrected by any invited actor, which, in turn, in a rather strange way, is still leveled by the Retribution crew. For that short period of screen time, script writers managed to quite skillfully instill characters with expressive and sympathetic personas, demonstrate their points of view and attitude towards certain events and characters. They can occasionally joke and even change attitudes to each other. Combined with the approach of continuous and smooth presentation of the plot, demonstrated in the first act and the grand finale of Infinite Warfare, the strengthening of immersion and evoking empathy with chemistry between ship crew are bound in an amazing adventure combination. However, it's such an incredibly small use in the second act looks very strange and suspicious, until we find out a detailed history of development, and most likely it will not change in the foreseeable future. While analyzing Infinite Warfare, I had a definite thought about the large-scale absence of the strongest sides of the game in its middle, which will further be an entirely speculative guess. Based on pre-release promotional trailers and materials, some of which are even now still present on the game's Steam page since announcement day, I had suspicions that at a certain stage of development, a lot of content was cut from Infinite Warfare for an unknown reason. The actual in-game story was compiled from the remnants closer to the final stages. For example, the final version is missing a number of missions with a fairly advanced level geometry and animations elaboration that have passed many iterations, and the final had at least one alternative variant. Traditionally, the development of games does not stop until they go to gold, and many important decisions, sometimes dramatically affecting the final form of a product, can be made at any stage of development. Most likely, with the start of the second act, Infinite Warfare initially had an extremely branchy variability. This decision to cut out such an important feature is by no means minor and easily adopted during an expensive development, but in the context of the time period after the announcement of Infinite Warfare, its fulfillment was fueled by the indecent single-player campaign of Black Ops 3 and the large unjustified flurry of negativity that hit the Infinity world after release of the first trailer. Based on the general tone of the narrative, I assume that the additional missions, originally present and then cut out of the game, were conceived as elaborated as its best segments. Depending on the chain of decisions in completed or failed tasks, the success probability of the following ones was determined, the percentage counter of which is still present in the game. There was an opportunity to choose partners for missions, which anyway, in any situation, even that seems successful to you, would continue to die, both from the lack of alternatives to the current situation and as a result of the intervention of Keith Harington and McGregor characters, which in fact was practically almost non-existent in the game. The main leitmotif of Infinite Warfare is that it will not be possible to save everyone in the war. The tasks necessary for victory and even survival sometimes require them to be completed at any cost, and ultimately only a handful of people can survive the final assault on the Martian shipyard. However, the opportunity to choose those who will survive is gone. In the final version, we observe only one of the possible event development scenarios, herewith not complete. There are almost unlimited possibilities for the embodiment of a wide variety of military stories, regardless of the time period chosen for the game. Even the most unpretentious idea for confrontation, with proper creative and committed execution, can be turned into an exciting adventure. Someone at Infinity Ward had a distinct vision of switching the narrative demonstration perspective from collection of missions to continuous story, and while Infinite Warfare mainly handles to follow this direction, it turned out to be incapable to accompany storyline with proper main tragic theme execution, apparently due to the reasons unknown. I will look forward to see what Taylor Kurosaki and his team will come up with in future games, because the potential of Call of Duty series is truly infinite. It's all about the completeness of realization.